This is weird. Okay. Today we will talk about a very delicate, but maybe also very sensitive issue. My name is Marjan Olfers. I'm a professor in sports law at the Vrije Universiteit, the Free University in Amsterdam. So, a couple of years ago, I just worked on topics like doping, match fixing, betting in sports, corruption, and so on. The tough and dark side of sports, I thought. But then in 2013, I got a phone call. A phone call of a man with a trembling voice, and he started to cry. And of course, I was moved, but I didn't know who he was and what he wanted to talk about. And he kept crying. And then he asked me, "Can you help me?" And I said, "With what?" And then he told me his story. It was a story about a little child who was 11 years old. And he loved judo. And he got his first kiss at 11 years old from this judo teacher. And now he was almost 50 years old, and he phoned me. And he asked me, "Please, Marjan, can you do something about it? Because this man is still playing judo with little children." And that's when I started my first research on this delicate issue. And it was tough. It was really tough till today. And today is not about me doing research. It's about us all doing something to prevent this horrible act of child abuse. So, first of all, I want to invite Karen to speak about everything. Just Karen, please. And I think she's really brave that as a victim, she will talk with us about child abuse. Thank you.
Good evening. I am Karen. This is my life. I have woken up. Oh no, I am still here. Another failed suicide attempt. I am taken out of an ambulance, led through a psychiatric hospital. I am in a daze. We get to a door. It is opened with a key. I step inside and I turn around. I watch the door being shut. Double locked. It's locked. I can't get out. I am locked in. What did I do so badly that I have to be locked up for? Well, they can't keep me in here forever, and when they let me out, I'll do it again. I'll succeed next time. I will kill myself. After the early morning training sessions as a little girl, I ran into the changing rooms asking the other girls to wait for me. Please wait for me until I'm dressed and I can leave with them. They can't wait. They run out the door. They are getting away as well. I am in the changing room on my own. I quickly tried to get into my school uniform, not even drying myself. Next, I hear the plastic door at the foot pool into the changing rooms opening. The chair creaks. Someone is stepping over it. Footsteps through the shower area. I am hurrying up so much to get out of here. Quickly, quickly, Karen, hurry up. The door handle is being pushed down. The door is slowly opening. I am frozen. I am sick. I see the top of a shoe appearing, a leg, a tummy with the familiar jumper or the Speedo t-shirt. The door is wide open now. He is standing there, staring at me with that look on his face. I am trapped. The only way out is the door, and he is there, blocking me in. He is so big, and I am so small. I can't get out. I am frozen solid to the ground, and my heart is racing. I am so petrified. I am so scared, because I know what is coming next. He starts to walk towards me. I am backed into the wall. I can't move. There is nothing I can do. He has caught me. Oh no, please, someone help me. My dad is asleep in his car, waiting for me on the other side of the wall of this changing room. So close, but yet so far to save me. From the age of 10, every night that I went to bed, I hoped that I would sleep. But most of all, I really hoped that if I went to sleep, I would never wake up again. All I wanted was to die. I didn't want to live in this world anymore. I couldn't do it anymore. This deep pain, this deep hurt, it was killing me. As I stood in that courtroom in March 2000, a man called Derry O'Rourke was told to stand up. Different names, different years being called out, terrible words for horrible acts being said. I didn't understand any of it. I felt sick. What is going on? Then my name. Then the list of years. Then the list of horrible acts of what this man did to me. How do you plead? Guilty or not guilty? Guilty, he said. As the power left my body and I fell back against the wall, my brother was trying his best to hold me up. I have got my answer. Oh my God, it's true, it's true, it's all true. It wasn't a nightmare after all. It is true, and they believe me. Now I know what is wrong with me. Derry O'Rourke abused me when I was just a little girl. Something happened to me that day standing in that courtroom. For the first time, I was believed, and it made it all real. Derry O'Rourke was the swimming coach for the King's Hospital Swimming Club in Dublin, and also the Irish Olympic coach at the time. Derry O'Rourke abused me sexually, mentally, physically, and emotionally while I was swimming for his club. He was the boss. He was God. What he said went. He had total power over everything and everyone. No one answered back Derry O'Rourke. He was a swimming coach, that's all. But yet he was given and he took the position and the power that allowed him to abuse me and many others also. I got up early every morning to train hard before school and back into the swimming pool straight after school for more training every day for many years. I don't remember a time that nothing happened to me while I was there, a time he didn't get me. I was always on guard so that he would not get me on my own. I was always on high alert. I was a little girl, and the only time I was safe was when I was in the swimming pool. As soon as I stopped, I could feel him, see him watching me. He had total power, total control over me, over my swimming, and over my life. He was so good at what he was doing. Everyone trusted him. Everyone believed him. Everything he said, what he wanted, he got. No one questioned Derry O'Rourke. As far as he was concerned, he was the best in Ireland. He was coaching us. He was making it all happen. You did exactly what he told you to do, or else you were out. He knew exactly what he was doing. My dream was to swim for Ireland at the Olympics. I believed that I could do it. My parents believed in me. He knew I believed I could do it. He knew what he could do to me the very first time he saw me. This man was at the start of destroying my life, my family's life. Unless abuse comes to your door, you will never, ever know the true, deep pain it causes. As a young swimmer with dreams, I looked up to my swimming coach. He was great. I trusted him. I loved him. He knew the right training I needed to do, the right technique I needed to change to swim faster. He knew it all. He knew everything from my training to help me get to the Olympics. Everything he said, I believed him. Everything he told me to do, I did. But at the same time, I was a very, very frightened little girl who loved swimming. I wanted to swim for Ireland at the Olympics. That's all. I was part of a wonderful team, but didn't like what he was doing to me now, and I didn't tell anyone, and he knew I wouldn't tell anyone. The position he was in as an Irish swimming coach gave him a perfect opportunity to abuse and hurt me. There are many ways to hurt and abuse a young child. What he said to me, how he said it, the tone of his voice. When he spoke to me, the volume of his voice. Was it low? Was it high? How he looked at me, how he didn't look at me, how he watched me, his eye contact, looking at me, staring straight at me, going deep into me, his facial expressions, turned towards me or away from me, or not looking at me at all, his body language, towards me or not towards me, his hand movements, are they kept at his lower body part or is he raising them high? His fingers, what way are they pointing? At me or away from me? Is he standing? Is he sitting down? What is he writing on his notebook? Why is he not writing in his notebook? He is looking at his stopwatch. He has stopped looking at his stopwatch. It's just hanging around his neck. He hasn't even got it in his hand now. He is ignoring me now. What have I done? I would hear his voice over everyone else, a couple of 100 people when I was in competitions swimming my race. Go! He would shout it once, and I knew I better move faster or else I'm in trouble when this race is finished. My God, what is he going to do to me now? My body is living in pure fear, waiting for his next move to come. He hasn't even touched me yet. Then the invasion and rape of my young body, removal of my clothes, removal of my swimming togs, or maybe not, all depending on where he had got me at the time, that he wanted to do something with my body. And each time he would say, I have to check your muscles and development for your swimming. As a young girl being left naked in front of a grown man while he carried out horrible acts on me and invaded and raped my young body on many, many occasions. He left me broken. He left me shattered, destroyed, dirty, ashamed, embarrassed, and most of all, he left me a dead little girl walking around this world. In order for me to go through this each time it happened, I had to go away. I had to leave my body. My spirit had died. I went very, very deep within myself so that he and no one else would ever be able to hurt me like this again. I had no choice. He was my swimming coach. I loved swimming. I was going to swim for Ireland at the Olympics. I was a little girl with big dreams, and he had total control and power over me, ruling me by fear and blackmailing me for my dream and my love of swimming. I was too frightened to tell anybody. Where did this all happen? Because it didn't stop him if there were people around me or not. He would call me, and I knew what was coming next. I was always trying to be faster than him, trying to run, trying not to be too near him so that he wouldn't catch me, so that he wouldn't call me. I wouldn't even dry myself in the mornings. I'd put my school uniform on me while I was still wet, just to get out into my dad's car quickly before he got me. Going into the boardroom at the side of the swimming pool to get my kickboard and paddles. If he catches me in here, he blocks me in, he jams the door. I can't get out and no one can get in. In his office, he locks the door. I can't get out. I'm trapped. It's just me and him. Rooms I slept in and shared with other swimmers when we were away at competitions. He would tell them to leave the room and lock the door. I'm trapped again. Trips away, training camps, on corridors of whatever building we were in. He didn't care who was there. The changing rooms, once again locking me in so I couldn't get out until he had finished checking me and said I could go. On the banks of swimming pools, everywhere I went while swimming, I was never free from him. My dad used to sleep in his car while I was swimming in the mornings. My dad was on the other side of the wall from me while this was happening. My mum and dad never just left me there at the pool. One of them was always near, not far away from me. He still got me. To be part of that team, you had to be good, you had to win. Failure was not an option. He always said, a winner never quits, and a quitter never wins. I had seen him move swimmers out of senior A's into senior B's, and if that happened to me, it was over. My swimming finished. My dream of swimming for Ireland in the Olympics gone. I didn't want that to happen to me, so I told no one. I would swim up and down the swimming pool, heartbroken, crying tears into my swimming goggles. What was wrong with me? I was a young girl that had died inside. I told him I was giving up swimming. I wasn't coming back for the next season. I was just 17 years old. I had to get away from it all. I had to leave it all behind. But that was not going to be the case. The damage had been done. The pain inflicted and the hurt is deep. I took up from where he left off. The pain, the hurt and the shame that I inflicted on myself for many, many years. I never told anyone what he did to me until after he was sent to prison. I didn't even want to tell myself. I had it locked very far away. I didn't want to believe it was true. It hurt too much. When I did tell what he had done to me, the world I had tried so hard to hold together for so long just came tumbling down around me. I was now definitely living in hell. It broke my mum and dad's hearts when I told them what happened. When the story was in the Irish newspapers, I remember my mum sitting at the kitchen table reading the newspaper. She stopped and she looked at me and she said, "Karen, this is my little girl I am reading about. This is my child and it's you." My mum was heartbroken. My mum and dad watched as I slowly broke down and they tried their very best to help me. The last day I left that courtroom in Dublin, July 2000, after Derry O'Rourke was charged and sentenced to 12 years in prison for sexually abusing me and other swimmers, another painful stage of my life was to begin. The first of many suicide attempts began, each one of them resulting in hospitalisation, waking up to nurses, to doctors, to tubes, to drips, to more medication, meant to help me to stop shaking, to help me sleep, to help me wake up, to help me cope with my life. I was 10 years under psychiatric care, and 2 years of that time as an inpatient in that psychiatric hospital, and I have spent time in the lock-up wards of this hospital. I cried out to the doctors, if you could cut off my 2 arms and my 2 legs with a chainsaw, it would not hurt me as much as this deep pain is hurting me. You can't see it, no one can see it, but I can feel it, and it hurts me so much that I can't live with it. Please help me. I just can't do this anymore. I had to be put into a psychiatric hospital lock-up ward because I was a danger to myself. In order for me to be kept alive, I had to be locked up so that I would not kill myself. I have lost so many things in my life over what he did to me. I have paid a very high price for the sport I loved so much. My biggest loss is what it did to my wonderful mum and dad. It broke their hearts. It broke their spirits. My mum told me that she loved me and that she was sorry she didn't look after me when I was a little girl, that all she wanted from me was to be happy. 4 days after this, my mum's body was taken out of the canal by a fireman. My beautiful mum was gone. She was amazing, a beautiful lady and a wonderful mother. The pain of my mum's death by suicide destroyed me and my family. It killed my heart. There is no tablet, no drug or alcohol that can numb or take away that pain or ever change it. My dad never recovered from this, and he would say on many occasions, Karen, I took you there and Mum is dead. Dad died 5 years ago, and as Dad lay in his hospital bed, I knew that he was dying. I wanted to tell him how much I loved him and to thank him for my life and for being the best dad ever. When I did, he turned his head and he looked at me. He started crying and he said, I don't know about that, Karen. I knew exactly what he meant. I had always said to Mum and Dad, it's not your fault, you didn't know. I never told you. Because if I had told you, I know you would have saved me. Only 6 years ago, I was on antidepressants, Valium, Librium, inhalers to help me breathe, prescription painkillers, over-the-counter painkillers. I smoked 40 to 50 cigarettes a day. I drank high levels of alcohol. I was crippled and I struggled to walk. I lost the power in my legs quite a few times. I was in the depths of a deep depression with an eating disorder. In Ireland, Derry O'Rourke, George Gibney, Frank McCann, Ronald Bennett and Ger Doyle, all involved in swimming at the same time. They abused many young swimmers between them, as is written in our book called Deep Deception. Every child is precious. Every child has a right to be safe in their childhood. Without children, there is no sport. Athletes are 18 and under. They are children. And children are the sport's future. Without children, there is no sports. And what happens to children as a child may destroy their whole life as an adult, and some children just don't make it. My dreams of swimming for Ireland in the Olympics, my love for my sport, turned into the darkest moments of my life. It put me in hell on earth, and it caused me great pain, hurt, and deep sadness. It has made me who I am today in front of you, sharing my story and asking every single one of you here to please help protect children. Don't let this happen again. Please do not let any other child end up with a life like mine. I am a survivor of child sexual abuse. I am a victor, not a victim.
Yeah. I never know how to react on such a story, Karen, but it's so incredibly brave, and I watch the audience and everybody is so deeply moved by your story. And thank you for willing to share this, and I think and I hope that everyone in this room, and maybe everybody we know, that we have to address this issue every time and fight for all these little children, because in my heart, you know, I see this little girl all the time. Thank you so much. And what I hear, what you told us also, that it was, of course, he went to jail, and they believed you, and it was very important that you could speak out and that they believed you. So for the next speaker, I think, please, Bettina Rulofs. She's from the German Sports University. And with her project, she gives victims a voice.
Now, thank you for the introduction. I'm glad to present the project Voice right after Karen Leach. It is not easy to speak after her, but I wanted to have this position in the program because Karen Leach is closely connected to our project. She's one of our ambassadors. Thank you, Karen, for supporting us and for sharing your experience with us. The Voice project is funded by the European Union, and it aims at combating sexual violence in sport through the voices of those who have been affected by it, which means through the victims, or as we rather call them, the survivors. I have the honor to present this project to you, but you need to know that there are many other people collaborating in this project. You see a list of names at the slide. And one of the colleagues, Tine Vertommen from Belgium, she's also here today. Now, this is the structure of my presentation. After a short introduction, I will explain the aims and methodology of the project, and finally, some very first insights. When dealing with the topic of sexual violence, we have to be aware that it is surrounded by a long-standing taboo in society in general, and in sport specifically. Quite a few cases have become public recently, as for example the case of Nikolaidis, the Austrian skier who had talked about her experiences of sexual violence only a few days ago, and thus lifted a long-hidden secret in the world of skiing in Austria. Apart from these media stories, there is a lack of empirical studies in this field, and this was the starting point for our project Voice. Let me explain our definition of sexual violence. It is an umbrella term for a wide range of harassing and abusive behaviors that are based on the execution of power, subjection, and humiliation by means of sexuality. So there is sexual harassment on the one side of the continuum and sexual abuse on the other side, and we have to be aware that sexually harassing behavior is sometimes the starting point for more severe acts of sexual abuse. To make it more precise, I would like to differentiate 3 categories. Sexual violence without physical contact, as for example sexist jokes, harassing text messages, or images with sexual content. Or the second one, sexual transgressive behavior, as for example unwanted touching or massages, forms of exhibitionism. And third, sexual violence with physical contact, as for example unnecessary or forced physical contact of a sexual nature, penetration and rape. In a quantitative study that we did in Germany recently, 1,800 elite athletes responded to a systematic questionnaire, and in total, 63% of the responding athletes indicated no experience of sexual violence in sport. Yet 37% of the athletes have such experience, of which 16% indicated sexual violence without physical contact, 18% transgressive behaviors, and 3% sexual violence with physical contact. Furthermore, 11% of the responding athletes have experienced severe, which means physical sexual violence and or continuous sexual violence, not only once, going on for a longer time. 70% of the affected athletes were under the age of 18 when the first incident occurred. And female athletes are significantly more often affected than male athletes. Although it is of utmost importance to have quantitative prevalence studies in this field, we have to notice that there are only few studies so far with deep insights into cases of sexual violence. The existing studies tend to urge the individual voices of the victims or survivors into passivity. Yet the reconstruction of the victims' cases is an important resource of knowledge, and thus it is an aim of the Project Voice to stop silencing the victims and to give them a voice. Your voice, your life, your truth, that's the message Karen Leach has provided for our project. And we are also supported by Gloria Viseras, a former Olympian athlete from Spain, and Ralf Zitzmann, a former soccer player in Germany. And in the meantime, other former athletes have joined our network. The main aims of our project are to generate crucial research data on sexual violence in European sport by listening to the voices of survivors and to produce a powerful knowledge exchange and educational resources enhancing the European sports community to combat sexual violence and strengthen the integrity in sport. This is our partner consortium. If you cannot read it at the back, do not worry. It's just to show you that there are a lot of organizations and people involved in this project. The project is facilitated in 8 countries: Denmark, UK, Hungary, Germany, Austria, Belgium, Spain, and Slovenia. And in each country there is a university in the main responsibility for the project, supported by a sport organization and a victim support organization. There's a steering group at the center of the project, and we are also happy to be co-partnered by 4 European sport organizations: ENGSO Youth, EGLSF, EPC, and EUSA. The project is designed in 6 work packages, with the steering and management at the basis. In work package 2, we are researching the voices of those affected by conducting an interview study with survivors of sexual violence in sport in all participating countries. Following this, in work package 3, we facilitate national hearings in every country with the aim of acknowledging the survivors' reports by a broader group of key stakeholders in the field of sport. And in work package 4, a European workshop has just taken place in Cologne in order to develop networks, exchange good practice, and create concepts for educational resources. Right now, we are producing these educational resources. We are going to produce a set of films, and the voices of survivors will be at the center of these films. And I will now give you some more details on work package 2 and 3, on our interview study and on our national hearings. With the help of our interview study, we have collected round about 70 interviews with athletes who have experienced sexual violence in the field of sports so far, and the process of taking interviews is still going on. The interviews are preceded by an in-depth, informed consent process, which means that the interviewees are informed about the content and aim of the interview, about their rights to stay anonymous and withdraw from the study at any time. During the interview, psychological support is available if necessary, and our interviewers received an intense training and strict guidelines for the interview process. We follow a narrative approach, leaving the decision on what and how to recount the experience entirely to the interviewees. Some selected first insights from the interviews, and we have to be aware that each case of sexual violence, of course, has its own characteristic. And 10 minutes are too short to just explain all the stories behind, of course. But there are some common findings in our study. Most of the people who have been interviewed by us have had long periods of silence. In our German sample, for example, it is remarkable that most of the persons that contacted us disclosure their experience at the age of 40 or older, whereas the incidence of sexual abuse had occurred when they were young, as a child or a teenager. When trying to come out with their stories of violence and abuse, most of the victims have had huge problems of finding support. During their time as an athlete, most of the interviewees did not come out with their experiences because of the family-like structures in sport organizations, with very close relationships and dependencies. In many reports, the disciplining regimes of sport seem to have an important role, which means that the athletes' bodies are controlled by the coach and entourage, and I think Karen's story gave a good example of this. And this often goes in line with a chilly climate in the team and the principle of no pain, no gain. Under these conditions, it is quite easy for perpetrators to have access to athletes' bodies and to hide sexually abusive behaviors. Another important aspect is the selection process in sport. To be the chosen one for the team or a specific event in sport hinders athletes to speak out about the abuse. We also noticed that in many cases, sexual violence is not the only form of maltreatment our interviewees have suffered from. There are interrelations of different forms of violence, emotional violence, physical violence, as well as power abuse, and in some cases even doping plays a role. All in all, in most cases, the experience of being sexually abused in the field of sport has a massive impact on the survivors' lives as well as their families. Regarding our work package 3, the national hearings, or as we call them, acknowledgement forums, I would like to sum up that they seem to have had a remarkable impact on the participants. First of all, there's a strong wish of the survivors to tell their story in such a format, in a semi-public yet safe environment, and to receive acknowledgement. In Germany, for example, we had 7 survivors speaking in front of 60 participants at our national forum, and all of the survivors reported afterwards that the act of sharing their experiences with responsible stakeholders in the field of sport relieves them of a heavy burden. From the audience, we received the feedback that listening to the survivors' reports fosters their understanding and promotes concrete action in the field. In Belgium, for example, the Flemish Parliament has decided to install an inquiry on cases of sexual abuse after or following the Voice project. And in Germany, the Sport Ministry is now taking action in order to have a mandatory set of child protection measures for all sport governing bodies that want to receive public funding from the German Sport Ministry. Finally, we have to be aware that these activities of the Voice project can only be the starting point for more systematic investigations in this field, and that an in-depth process of reconciliation for the survivors and for some of the sport organizations is still to come. This was my report on the Voice project. Thank you for your attention, and for those of you who are interested to learn more about our project, please contact our website or follow us on Twitter. We are also going to stage a final conference of that project at the beginning of May next year, and you're very warmly invited to join this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Bettina, for sharing this important Voice project, and it's great to hear that some countries give a follow-up to all the research. That's great to hear. Okay, the next speaker is Willem Feenstra, because what we see, of course, especially with this topic, that journalists played an important role to get this topic in the mindset of us all. So please, Willem, I will invite you to speak for us.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Willem Feenstra. I'm an investigative journalist for Dutch newspaper The Volkskrant. The past couple of years, actually, we wrote a lot about sexual abuse in sports. I was asked by the organization to tell a little bit about how journalism can cause a breakthrough in this debate about sexual abuse, and to explain a little bit our considerations as a newspaper on how to report on it. To start this presentation, I would like to give you a little insight on our famous Monday morning meetings we have at our newspaper. In this beautiful building you see here behind us, we come together in a big conference room, a room full of journalists and editors, at least 2 cups of coffee in front of everyone, most eyes more closed than open. This is how we usually start our week. We discuss the way we have reported about a certain news event. And I assure you, it can be very boring. But earlier this month, it was not at all like that. The theme of the meeting was sexual abuse. For us, it was one of the main news themes of the year, with the revelations coming from the world of sports, and later, of course, the Me Too movement. The Volkskrant, which translates to People's Paper, is traditionally a politically left-side newspaper with very polite and modest journalists, I would like to say. But this discussion about sexual abuse was one of the most heated ones we had in recent years. Certain colleagues, I won't mention any names, felt uncomfortable that our newspaper tells stories of victims who haven't been to court yet. They even questioned if we should write about it at all. And those colleagues raised some relevant questions. How do we know if a victim is telling the truth? Why don't we write about the numbers instead of the personal stories? Are sexual intimidation and sexual abuse themes a newspaper should cover at all? I will come back to those questions later, but first I would like to explain a little bit on the way we work with this topic and give you some examples of abuse cases we've reported on. This guy is Andy Woodward. he spoke in November 2016 already. A former football player in England gave an emotional interview to The Guardian. He told he had been sexually abused by his coach, and hundreds of victims followed his example and spoke out. For us in Holland, it raised the question, why would this happen in England and not over here? We couldn't answer it, so we started investigating. Alongside our stories, we placed an email address and a phone number for victims to call us when they wanted to tell their story. We promised them that all information would be treated confidentially and only be published if they said it was okay. This is Ronald Major. Dozens of people contacted us, most victims who never came forward with their story before. I spoke to dozens, and I think most of them didn't even tell their own partner what had happened before. One of them was Ronald Major, former youth player of Vitesse Arnhem, professional football club here in Holland. And he told us he had been abused when he was 11 years old by a staff member of the club. When he was 17 years old, he was still in the youth academy of Vitesse. He was a promising player, he could get to the first team, but he quit because he just couldn't bear to be there anymore on the fields where this all had happened. We explained to him that we had to try and verify his story. We talked to his parents, to former teammates and their parents, to his former trainers and coaches, to former board members of the club Vitesse. We had 2 meetings with the current board and their legal department. And then we did the interview and we published the story of Ronald Major. And this is the front page of that newspaper. Like Andy Woodward, Ronald Major wanted to encourage other victims to step forward. And that's exactly what happened. A man in his 60s contacted us. He was a bit hesitant, but agreed to come to the newspaper office to talk. He had been very successful in business before, but recently retired. With the new free time came the thoughts about the past. In the 60s, he played in the youth academy of PSV Eindhoven. It was there that he was sexually abused by a male who was involved in his team. This time, the story was much harder to verify. The man wanted to stay anonymous. He didn't have a lot of archive materials, like team photos, and he only remembered a few names of former teammates. But listening to his story, we just got the feeling that he was telling the truth. And luckily, he remembered the name of the abuser, the guy who did it. He knew the man moved abroad at the end of the 60s. So we started looking and eventually found the person in question. He had changed his name, but was still giving training at sport clubs. And until today, he still does so. As many of the perpetrators of sexual abuse, he made more victims. We found a few others in his new country. That was enough confirmation for us to pursue the story of the anonymous man. We set up a meeting between the victim and the board of PSV in the stadium. He asked us to join him, so together we spoke to Toon Gerbrands, which is the chairman of PSV. In England, many clubs where youth players were abused denied that it happened and never offered their apologies. In the dozens of conversations we had this year with victims of sexual abuse, it became quite clear to us what is very important for them, and that is recognition and apologies. And that is exactly what PSV did. They acknowledged the victim, they offered to pay for professional help, and most importantly, they offered him apologies. After we published about the abuse case at PSV, 4 other victims called us to tell about their experiences at PSV. With their consent, we reported their cases to the club. The chairman contacted all of them, offered them all apologies, and asked them for advice on how to prevent sexual abuse at the Youth Academy in the future. After this talk, Sander Roege of PSV will tell you a little bit more about the decisions of the club. Earlier this year, we interviewed the chairman of PSV about the cases of sexual abuse. I just want to share 2 of his answers with you, because they're quite exceptional. When you hear this, just keep in mind that in England, some clubs are still denying that the abuse ever happened, mainly because they are afraid they have to pay for damages. Question: isn't offering apologies to victims a confession of guilt? Answer by the chairman: so be it. We, the people who work for PSV at the moment, aren't guilty, of course, but we do acknowledge that bad things happened many years ago. People tell us their sincere stories and say, listen, the club should have done more to protect us. Well, they are right. Question: have you considered the possible legal consequences for PSV? Answer: no, and I also don't care. If you decide to turn left, you should accept the consequences. We do ask the victims why they came forward now. Nobody claims any money. Nobody wants to name and shame PSV. Many employees were afraid that would happen, but it didn't. We also ask ourselves what the consequences would be of 5 abuse cases within the club. Would it get harder to attract talented youth players? I think the opposite is true. It might sound crazy, but I am glad that the silence has been broken. In the following weeks, we wrote about the abuse cases at professional football clubs FC Eindhoven and Sparta Rotterdam. Victims of those clubs also contacted us. So after a couple of months investigating sexual abuse in professional football, these were the results. All 4 clubs opened a hotline for other victims to come forward. They all offered apologies to their victims. They offered to pay for professional help. PSV improved the prevention of sexual abuse in their youth academy. Vitesse changed its code of conduct. FC Eindhoven started a cooperation with PSV to learn from them. And Sparta Rotterdam fired a physiotherapist who was involved in the abuse. These things would never have happened without journalism. And if you ask me how journalism can cause a breakthrough, well, this is it. That brings me back to the heated Monday morning discussion we had at our newspaper earlier this month. I answered this to my colleagues. How do we know if they are telling the truth? We listen, we try to verify, and we investigate. We never publish before going through this process. Why don't we write about the numbers instead of the personal stories? To see the numbers and to get an idea of the scale of what happened, we need to tell personal stories of victims. Without the brave victims who stepped forward first, like Andy Woodward and Renald Major, and also like Karen, we don't know anything about numbers. Personal stories are necessary to raise awareness within the society about the impact of abuse cases on victims, about the shame surrounding the subject, and about the struggle of a victim after it happened. Are sexual intimidation and sexual abuse themes that a newspaper should cover? A very relevant question. We write about the manager of a company who committed fraud. We report about the senator who has a conflict of interest. We investigate the politician who takes bribes. Wherever somebody misuses his powers, it is our duty to make it visible. And although it is always an uncomfortable subject, mainly because of the intimate character of the stories, we need to keep writing about sexual abuse as well. I know that there are a few people in the room that are not always so happy, I'm looking at you, Geert, with what we write. For them I want to end with a famous quote of George Orwell, who gives me inspiration in my work. saying journalism is printing what someone else does not want printed. Everything else is public relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Willem. I talked with some of the victims you interviewed, and they were all very happy how you handled the case. Yes, they told me so. So the next one I will invite is, you talked about this case before. It's Sander Roege. Sander Roege, he was involved with the PSV Eindhoven case, and so he will talk about this case now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, I feel the same tension, anxiety. Before I get, or I had the opportunity to talk with the first victim, which did his story within PSV. Toon Gerbrands, he asked me to have the talk with the victims. As Willem already said, there were 5 victims within PSV. These victims were spread over the 60s, 70s and the 80s, so they were old cases. But I still remember that the talk with the first victim was for me, because I'm not an expert in cases like this, it was really exciting. I didn't know what to expect, but there was one thing that we promised ourselves as PSV, that we would like to be transparent. We would like to listen carefully about the stories that they would tell to us. And I think the most important thing is that we wanted to learn. We wanted to learn from the victims in how we can avoid cases like this in the future. So in the end, we spoke with 5 victims, and as already told, also in the work of Bettina Rulofs, to me it was, I was actually flabbergasted that 3 from the 5 persons I spoke never told their story to anyone. 20, 30, 40 years, they kept their story with them. And to me, Sander Roege, who is Sander Roege, but they told the whole story, they told everything. And afterwards, they were relieved. They were relieved that PSV, and in this case by Sander Roege, give them the opportunity to do their story, to tell what really happened. And also on the place where it happened, because we asked them, so where would you like to meet? Would you like to meet outside the stadium? Would you like to meet somewhere, maybe at your place? But they all wanted to come to the club. So I was really impressed by the stories. As I said, what we did was we listened, we were serious, we asked the questions that we thought were really exciting, or maybe the questions you don't want to ask, but we just did it and we learned a lot. And one of the first victims came up with an interesting question, because he said, I would like to meet the other victims. And we never thought of that, but we took the question to the other victims, and all the victims, they also had the wish to meet the other victims. So what we did is, that's now I think 5 weeks ago, just before a game of PSV, we invited all the victims, the 5 victims, and we also invited a specialist on sexual abuse who had a lot of experience within abuse within the Catholic Church. And yeah, 1.5 hours before the game, we came together, and just as exciting as I feel now, that moment was also very exciting because how are you going to manage that? Which questions are you going to ask? How do you try to get a conversation started? But it was a very, very powerful and emotional gathering where the victims had the opportunity to speak with each other about what happened. They could change information about in which area, which club, which trainer. They exchanged names, and within the meeting, they got so powerful and they got so connected to each other that over 2 months we will have a new meeting with them, just to give them a way to share their feelings, to share their experiences. And we as PSV, we think that we have to help them, that we have to be there for them. We also offered them help within a way of specialism. But after that meeting, I think for the victims it was really helpful. I think PSV gave them a way to share their experiences and their pain. So I hope that PSV can also in the future provide them a platform to share their feelings and to find a way to overcome this terrible experience. And what we did with our club is that we took an analysis of the youth department. We are busy with a code of conduct and a reporting code. We are busy with educating and training our staff. We need them to recognize signals and make it possible that suspicious matters can be talked about. And what we also try to do is to be very transparent towards our parents, the parents of the youth players. Just before the season was starting, we had a parent information evening, and there we just discussed with the parents what we found out, what we came up to, and we also asked them to be a partner in recognizing the signals with their sons, and we try to make them a partner in communicate about things that are not feeling well, that are not okay, and in this way we hope to avoid these terrible mistakes or misstands. So that's what we learned. It was emotional, it was impressive, but I think we find a way by discussing about it, by making the victims also an ambassador of the club, to find a way to avoid these circumstances the coming years, actually, to ban them out, and I hope that this will never happen again within PSV. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And for the Netherlands, I think this case and how PSV handled this case is one of the best practices. Don't think we don't have bad practices, we have, but this is one of the best practices, I think. Geert Slot is already there. He's from the Dutch Olympic Committee, and at this very moment there is an independent inquiry taking place into sexual abuse in the Netherlands, and he will speak about this topic.
Good evening. Worldwide, millions of people of all ages are subject to violence, often on a daily basis. Sexual harassment and abuse is an important part of this. If the Me Too movement has made something clear, it is that there is a big social problem in interpersonal behavior, especially where sexuality is concerned, and in which sport, unfortunately, is no exception. From the voices of survivors and from all sorts of articles, I learned a lot about the bad consequences of sexual harassment and abuse. Sexual child abuse is often described as traumatizing,
so hurtful that the victim is left with deep, hard-to-heal psychological wounds. As a sexually abused child, you are isolated and forced to remain silent. We've heard it again this evening. You will sometimes think along with the abuser and turn off your own feelings. If you have become a victim of sexual abuse in the past, it can have a major impact on your daily life years later. For example, at your work or in your study. In addition to physical complaints, you can also suffer from stress reactions, and this can express itself in fear, anger, shame, guilt. You may not be able to concentrate properly. You may sleep badly, and due to events in your area or news reports in the media, the experiences from the past can come back to you with a great intensity. Denial and trivialization of the abuse by a victim of trust can cause a lot of damage. We heard it this evening also. These are all reasons enough to not want anyone to be sexually abused in their lives and not in sport. Bruno Bruins, our new Minister for Medical Care and Sport, pointed out in his first speech to the Dutch Parliament that sport is incredibly important for our country and especially for all people in this country. We meet each other through sport, he said. And more importantly, sport teaches our children important lessons about assertiveness, cooperation, honesty, respect for each other, and dealing with loss. In his view, our top athletes make us proud of the country. Sport and exercises ensures that we stay healthy and fit. The minister told the parliament that he was able to summarize this in 3 words, namely, sport is fun. In this evening, that's a very difficult to understand idea, but it's true. Fun is what matters in sports. That's why people participate in sport, and they enjoy to watch it. Having fun is why so many Dutch people in the weekend pull on their sport shoes to run through the park, and why people dedicate themselves with heart and soul for the sports club. Having fun in sports is also the beginning of many top-sport careers. Fun is an intrinsic motivation. The rest comes afterwards. We achieve all those beautiful and social goals from sport, he said, only when people enjoy sport and have fun. So, here you see another important reason to minimize sexual harassment and abuse. It's difficult to see both visions of sport together. If you want to use sport as an important activity for the youth in your country, at least make it a safe place to be and to have fun. In 1996, there was a lot of media coverage around the Dutch elite judo coach about sexual abuse of 3 female top athletes. Also then, Willem, it was the newspaper, you read a newspaper that made the breakthrough. In this case, it was the catalyst for national level intervention programs. Since 1996, we, together with other parties like the Dutch Federation of Coaches, and with a lot of help from outside the sport, like from Marjan, and we worked very hard, and one of my colleagues, Lieke Vloets, is also here, worked specially on it. We designed and implemented an anti-sexual harassment and abuse development of various instruments. Some of the instruments you see on the screen, but there are more. On the basis of existing policy regarding the reduction of sexual harassment and abuse in sport, the sport has taken significant steps in recent years. Shortly before the turn of the year 2016, however, unknown serious cases of sexual harassment and abuse were discovered. This concerned both the Netherlands and abroad. Willem Feenstra talked about it. These reports prompted NOC NSF to conclude this independent investigation into sexual harassment and abuse in sport. We asked ourselves the question if we knew enough and if we had done enough. So at the end of 2016, we had the strong opinion we should realize an independent inquiry. André Bolhuis, president of the NOC, said it in the words, "The board of the NOC NSF feels it an important responsibility to do everything possible together with the sport federations to prevent sexual harassment and abuse in sport. It's very good to see an independent commission examine the effects of the policies that we have developed in this area since years." After the decision made in December 23, we saw a lot of more publicity in the media. At the same time, many parties spontaneously reported their offers to contribute. You see them on the screen. We had consultations with the Ministry of Justice, Health, the Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sport, and many others. They all supported the idea. In these days, we also got very useful insights into do's and don'ts of previous commissions in the Netherlands on sexual abuse, from the Catholic Church, child protection, and others. The aim of the inquiry is to get a more detailed picture of the nature and extent of sexual harassment and abuse in sport. The research also should result in concrete recommendations for sport organizations and other parties involved to improve the approach to sexual transgressive behavior. With the research, victims from the past are offered the opportunity. With this research, victims from the past are offered the opportunity to tell their stories also. They can also come into contact with adequate assistance and with criminal and disciplinary chains for the possible prosecutions of their perpetrators. After some discussions, we decided to be the client of this inquiry ourselves and to give full freedom of action to the fully independent commission. The research commission has 3 members and is chaired by Klaas de Vries. Among others, he was minister of several departments. The commission president de Vries, he asked Clemens Ros van Dorp and Egbert Meijer, a judge from the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, to join him, and they were willing to join the commission. The commission started with the preparation and the design. The actual research started May 15. Gerard Dielissen, General Director of NOC NSF at the start of the commission, sexually being abused is one of the worst experiences that you can happen. If that still happens within your sport, a place where you would want to trust everyone around you, that's hard. It's good that there's now places where they can tell their stories, such as the confidential advisors of the Sport Trust and other helplines. I think it's important to have people from outside regularly take part in everything we do in sport. Also, or perhaps correctly, when it comes to sexual harassment and abuse in sport. I'm convinced that the Commissie de Vries committee will help us to achieve what we all want, a safe environment for everyone to enjoy sport. In our opinion, sport has the power to make life and society a bit better and often more fun. Yet, unfortunately, there are also persistent reports about the ugliness of sport. Often these reports are about the abuse of dominant positions. Abuse, for example, of the position that you may organize Olympic Games in your country and then you cheat with the doping samples during that games. Abuse sometimes also of the strong motivation of a young athlete who wants to become a top athlete, as a result of which this young athlete goes along with the sexual desires of the person who is nearby and who is in the position to make or break this dream. Abuse also of the peer pressure that athletes sometimes exert to let one athlete, literally and figuratively, expose him or herself far beyond her or his limits. The abuse of dominance, of course, is not reserved for the sports sector. I told you about the Me Too movement. I'm convinced that we can show the beauty and social strength of sports in many different ways, and we can strengthen it. At the same time, it's our duty to make every effort to ensure that the abuse in sport is eliminated as much as possible so that everyone can enjoy sport. We look forward to the results of the Commission that we expect on December 12th, so we can strengthen our efforts with renewed vigor. Thank you.
Thank you, Geert. I will now ask, and I hope I pronounce it well, Geert Nikolaidis. We go from the Dutch perspective to the perspective of the Council of Europe when it comes to sexual victimization, to the fight against sexual victimization in sports.
Thank you very much. I'm sure I would have troubles in pronouncing some Dutch names for sure, so don't worry, that's natural. So thank you very much. I'm the last speaker in this last day, and I must confess in the beginning that I come from a totally different background. I'm a psychiatrist. I was not involved in the sports sector. My involvement began 6 years ago when we were conducting a big survey in Greece and the Balkans in 9 countries about child maltreatment. We had anonymous samples from schools and so forth, 60,000 children in overall. And in one particular prefecture in the island of Crete, in the prefecture of Rethymnon, we were finding too high rates of male self-reported sexual victimization. Around 12% were reporting to have severe history of sexual victimization. And that was, we were wondering why this happened. We were thinking that maybe there was some mistake, but 6 months after our data collection, the biggest case of pedophilia was disclosed in the prefecture of Rethymnon because a coach of a local team of basketball for boys and adolescent males had involved more than 200 boys throughout the last 7 years in a pyramid in which he introduced gradually children to sexual activity, and that was the biggest case of pedophilia in Greece. And so we worked there for 2 years with victims, the children, with the local community, with the coaches, which apparently had no means in exercising their job after the disclosure of the case, and being for 10 years in the Lanzarote Committee of the Council of Europe and also serving currently as Vice Chair, I was asked to present a few things about how we worked in the Council of Europe for the particular subject. So given that I'm not from the sports context, I must ask you in advance to apologize, to excuse me for any kind of things that I might not get it perfectly right. So, the Council of Europe is an international organization. It's not like the European Union. It's a voluntary organization, began in 1949, and it's a fundamental organization on protecting human rights, a voluntary organization working not with compulsory directives, but with mainstreaming and persuasion of member states and all involved parties. It has been pioneering for issues regarding children's rights and child protection from any kind of victimization, not only sexual, but also protection of children for physical abuse, for any kind of exploitation. It has a work structured in 4 or 5 year strategies, which they are unfolded in multiple levels, and had several resources or material published, like guidelines for integrated national strategies for protecting children's rights from abuse or victimization, or more thematic material like for exposure of children to sexual violence through communication and telecommunication technologies, or corporal punishment, or protecting children's rights from detention environments and so forth. And the Lanzarote Convention has been a leading instrument of Council of Europe for protecting children for sexual victimization. It has been signed by all member states of Council of Europe 10 years ago in a small island of the Canary, I think it's in Spain, the Lanzarote, and entered into force in 2010, and now it has been ratified and became a law, a domestic law of 42 out of 47 member states of Council of Europe. And these are the member states. I don't expect you to read all of this, but the main axes of the Lanzarote Convention are prevention, protection, and prosecution. That is, for instance, prevention, screening procedures in all services that involve children for the past record of volunteers or professionals that are involved having daily contact with children, giving information to children about sexual issues and their rights, involving all stakeholders, including the private sector, in efforts to sustain prevention of children's victimization, measure for sex offenders in order to minimize the risk of reoffending, but also for protection, mandatory reporting for all professionals to be introduced as a legal concept, introducing SOS helplines, introduce provisions for removing the alleged perpetrator from the environment of a child and not the reverse, which used to be the case, children-friendly procedures for victims, and limiting the time that a victim, especially of sexual abuse, is called to repeat its story again and again, because we know how traumatic that is for a child who survived an occasion of sexual abuse. And also prosecution, abolishing the statute of limitation, new legal concepts. Take into account this came into force 10 years ago, and these were quite new for many countries as a legal concepts, like focusing on sexual abuse within the circle of trust, in the family or around the family, from people that are familiar to children victims, or grooming and other concepts of new technologies, harassment of children in the new era. I will jump this just to get into the main thing here about the sports context, but I want to insist that our means are mainly mainstreaming and good practices promotion and working together in providing synergies with all other international organizations like the EU or other WHO, UNICEF, and other related organizations that have a child protection mandate or NZEDA. 1 in 5 pan-European campaign was launched several years ago, and this has been our slogan because, reviewing the evidence, it seems that 1 in 5 children in Europe has at least one episode of sexual victimization in its childhood, and focusing on combating these adverse experiences that happen in the circle of trust and monitoring the implementation of the convention have been one of the leading worries and focuses of the Lanzarote Committee, which is a committee that is provided by the convention, and it's the body that supervises this work. And also a part of that has been the introduction of the 18th of November as the Pan-European Day for the Protection of Children from Sexual Victimization. We also have organized a lot of other activities like Conference on International Collaboration or in situ visits for exchange of good practices. Now, in regards to the sexual abuse of children in the sports context, we collaborate with other departments of Council of Europe and other departments of the European Union and other international organizations. But let me just summarize how this ended up here. I think it was initially introduced as a subject by narratives by decorated athletes, Olympic champions and so forth, that disclosed what they've been through in their childhood. This made the phenomenon known to societies, and when it was researched, and it seemed that it's not so uncommon as we initially thought, and a lot of empirical research was disclosed on the subject. One interesting thing is that the sports in which there was an atmosphere of more male chauvinism, machismo, and so forth, seem to be more facilitating sexual victimization of males, unlike what one could believe about this. And there is a lot of empirical research being produced, and this is also additional support to the personal narratives. And now there are a lot of research products developing more and more data on how extensive is the exposure of children to sexual adverse experiences in the sports context, and that's not an exhaustive list. There are a lot more. Good colleague Tien has a lot to say in reviewing the existing data. There are a lot of champions that have disclosed other physical or sexual victimization in their childhood. And given all this background, the aim and objective is to create a framework in which we could provide safe environment for children to engage in sports activities without fearing of being perpetrated. We also should provide a safe environment for professionals to safeguard their work and secure themselves from allegations or whatever. We also should provide the administration and the clubs with some standard procedures on how to make decisions on allegations, and should promote good practices and challenge practices that are harmful, and also provide clarity on safeguarding children to all the parties involved in sport, including their families and parents that need also to be reassured that they can send their children to sports clubs without fear. And nowadays there have been developed a lot of such operational procedures which begin from screening procedures in personnel and volunteers involved in sports, up to early detection of what is called excessive involvement of personnel, which sometimes is behind that can be some intentions that need to be checked. Also, standard procedures in discussing issues in administration of sports clubs and so forth. But most of all, we should focus on not facilitating a blind submission to authoritative figures, which is a common element in all narratives of champions and decorated athletes that were subjected to sexual victimization. This very close attachment to an authority figure can very easily facilitate all kinds of worrying behaviors. Do not facilitate the logic of success and performance at any cost, whatever it might take, because we should introduce the limits of things that should be presented again with the goals we set for achievement. So there's no performance that should be achieved at whatever it takes and regardless of the limits, the boundaries that we break. We shouldn't support male chauvinism because this is proven to facilitate sexual victimization of children, but instead facilitate an atmosphere of transparency and dialogue among all agents involved in the sports activities, adults and minors, coaches, families, children, administrators, and accept the facts and do not deny that. Two milestones you might already be aware of was the inclusion of such issues in the consensus statement of the International Olympic Committee and the publishing of the International Safeguards for Children at Sport, which is a 8-axis set of recommendations of how to initiate effective procedures for protecting children for sexual victimization in the sports context. Given this, and throughout this process, Council of Europe has developed this enlarged partial agreement on sports, in which website and its overall activities has a lot of very useful resources like good practices or manuals and guides for particular application of procedures to protect children in the sports context. Also organizing various events like conference on bringing the issue to be more visible. And lately, the Council of Europe, EPAS, the partial agreement, Lanzarote committee, and the European Union have released these two projects which want to bring the issue more forward, the PSS and the PSS Plus, which was the continuation of the initial PSS project. The PSS Pro Safe Sport project had the aim of providing online resource center for making available throughout Europe to all sports clubs or professionals or involved parties a lot of material, knowledge and practical advice on how extensive the problem is and how it can be tackled, to create a pool of experts that could include people from the sports sector, people from the social services and child protection, academics, clinicians, lawyers, and all the kind of professionals that could be involved, available for people that wanted to make use of their expertise. Also develop video clip and other dissemination material, and provide tools and technical support to provide solutions in specific sports which require specific setting of the procedures to protect children, and a training kit. Here is a dissemination material. This is the online academy, which has a set of courses that provide technical skills for how to implement these policies to protect children from sexual victimization. And I think that there are a lot more initiatives that are currently unfolding, involving Council of Europe, but other sports industry, sports sector agencies, and the European Union that could put the issue a bit forward and provide more country-specific, sport-specific, concrete, comprehensive plans on putting in place effective procedures to reassure everybody in the communities and in the sports communities and in the wider communities that children can enjoy their favorite sports without being exposed to such dangers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geert, for your presentation. And I think it's good to hear about all these measures that are taken also on a level of at the Council of Europe and also at national level. So please feel free to join us, George. I will just move. You can sit here, so no problem. So I hope, maybe there are some questions that you like to ask to the panel, or, sorry? Oh, that's me. Yeah, that's me. Okay. Finally, I found my place, you know. It's here, yeah, over here. So are there any questions to our panel? I hope so. Yes, there. Is there a mic? Yeah.
Thank you, Minky Worden from Human Rights Watch. I'm interested in a question for the entire panel, but especially for Mr. Feenstra. What was the public reaction to the coverage, and how has that affected your ongoing coverage?
Yeah, I think. Can you hear me? I think so. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's been very different actually. We've seen that. Well, let's say after the main publications, there was like you could say outrage. So people very angry because of what happened, and also felt sorry for the victims. So we received maybe 10, 20 postcards, for example, for the victim. To give to him, and this was in the case of Renald Major. But you can always feel there's also a very uncomfortable public feeling when it's about publication about abuse, sexual abuse, and I think it's because it's such a private thing. It's such a private thing, and then suddenly you're reporting about it, and especially when when the perpetrator's name is being mentioned, yeah, it makes it different. It makes it difficult to report about it, and we're very careful with that. Also because we think that it's important to keep on writing, and we don't want to, let's say, overdo it. So we're very conscious about that, and although my personal opinion is that when somebody leaves a trail of victims, it's not unfair to be named in a newspaper as well, but that's personal.
But there is also an ethical question, I think. Is it good when a newspaper asks people to come forward? That's also a discussion and currently a debate in the Netherlands. Is this ethical? Don't victims need to go to the police or get help, psychological help? And do they need to go to a newspaper? Can you ask this from people? I also like the opinion of other people on the panel. Willem, maybe?
Yeah, I can answer it. No, yeah, that's an interesting question. We asked ourselves when we started publish, especially the phone number, because that's something we didn't do before. We only posted an email address. But I think it's the only way to force a breakthrough, to look at the numbers, because you need to hear the stories. If we don't know about the stories, if we don't know what happened, then for example at PSV, where 5 victims came forward now, and I think, well, maybe their lives got a little bit better after what happened. Yeah, I think it's necessary, and they, some of them, one of them at least, went to the police before, went even to PSV before, many years ago, but didn't get the recognition that he was looking for. And I think that, of course, with all, when you're careful and when you keep this always in mind, that you can also hurt people, and you have to watch out for false accusation, etc. But when you do it like that, when you do it with integrity, then I think you can really make a difference for people, and it would be strange not to let them contact us. Okay, Karen also want to respond, but for me, and you also like to respond on this question because it's currently a debate in the Netherlands, and I know you treat this subject with care because I know you are a good journalist, but also other newspapers ask to come forward, and some of these newspapers, I would never tell a victim to go to these people because I don't trust them. So maybe, Karen, you like to respond to?
Is this on? I don't think this is on.
This is working.
Okay. I suppose from my own personal experience, first of all, to go to the police in Ireland, the guards, it is one of the hardest things that anyone can ever do. For me, it was one of the worst days of my life on top of everything else because you're grilled and they want details, and it's very, very hard when you do go to the police. From journalists, and the book Deep Deception, which is about the swimming scandals in Ireland, was written about a journalist. It's Justine McCarthy. And Justine supported us the whole way through our court case, and she has been there from the beginning and even up until now. I will be still in contact with her. And I suppose from my experience of being with the journalist, she listened. She listened with kindness and understanding. And she shared our story with kindness and understanding and respect. So I think it's very, very important when somebody does go to speak to somebody and to share their story, it's how you have to listen, and it's above anything else, it's with kindness. Taking that you said about why doesn't somebody go to seek personal help, that's also another step. You have to be ready to do that. It's not an easy thing to do. When you do start speaking about it, it opens a whole can of worms. For me, it opened a dustbin that the lid that I had on my lid and my dustbin was tightly locked, and when I started to speak, it opened, the lid popped off, and every single creepy crawly that was inside me came out. So it takes a lot and a big step to go. But I would say from a journalist's point of view, thank you, because my experience with Justine, and the story needs to be told, and most of the time it is only journalists that really will tell the story. Yeah.
George, and then Geert.
Yeah. 2 comments. I acknowledge, of course, that the media and the press is the 4th pylon of power in societies. However, I think that we have to put pressure in societies to put in place effective procedures so that any child perpetrated, irrelevantly from whether there is media coverage or not, should be treated with respect and care, and the allegations should be taken seriously. That entails that we should put in place in societies standardized procedures for interviewing children who report allegations, so that experience in the police or in the juridical, in the prosecutor's office or in whatever else should not be as traumatic as they are in many countries now. There's a growing momentum right now throughout Europe to put in place a harmonized procedure of a standardized interview in all children victims that report such allegation, and this should be put in place without the requirement of some sort of pressure, media pressure being having to be put forward in order for the child to be heard. That's my first remark. My second remark, because myself I'm a clinician as well, and I know that in treatment of children going through such traumatic experiences, the ultimate target of any kind of treatment is one, to make the child victim of sexual abuse feel again not being a victimized child, but a child, full stop. You know that this is a goal that is never fully 100% achieved, but the closest you get the better the outcome is. So I'm a little bit worried of people having to repeat the traumatic stories again and again and again in any kind of context. So I think some reservation to that would be useful for those victims. I know that the sports context is influenced by highly decorated athletes, and I truly respect those Olympic champions that had the courage of saying their story and their personal narrative, and that was an essential asset for opening the issue to societies. But I'm a little bit reserved in overdoing that to any kind of victim. Thank you.
Yeah. Geert?
Yes, I would live in a world where journalists say my work is to feel people better, that they feel themselves better. Like he said, if the 5 from PSV, they gained a little bit with what we did. But the problem is that I don't know whether all the media are thinking in the same way. And there's a little problem. How do you know that for sure? Because you said it also, police, psychological help, other places, perhaps without publicity, because I don't know what publicity does with someone, and I think that every person is different. But on the other hand, I think that when a journalist discloses something that is wrong, and otherwise it won't come forward, then for me it's very easy, all right, because it's very important that we change these things. So for me it's more changing the things, changing the measures, than getting people feeling themselves happy.
Yes. Thank you. Are there more questions? Yeah. There? Yeah. Yeah.
This is on?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's working.
Laura Robinson from Canada. First of all, thank you very much, Karen. I'm just think you're very brave and a very articulate speaker too. I did the first article in Canada on sexual abuse in sport in 1992 in the Toronto Star, called actually Sexual Abuse, Sport's Dirty Little Secret, and spoke at Play the Game on the rape culture of Canadian ice hockey, junior ice hockey. So it is it's encouraging to see a panel, but I did that talk in 2002, and I wish Play the Game would always have these panels and make them the priority panel. And I'll tell you that I was a bike racer and a cross-country skier. So coming from sports with lots of doping. But there was not, the doping was nothing compared to the sexual abuse. There was so much sexual abuse in both of those sports that doping, it didn't matter to me at all that I was racing against someone who may have been doping. So it's actually just a comment, but what I want to say is that I hope we can come out at the end of the sessions here by Friday morning, or maybe that's Thursday night, not sure. Anyway,
Wednesday.
With a declaration that is about the safety of children in sport when it comes to sexual abuse. Because George Gibney, who you mentioned, is now in the States and got a green card from Swim USA, and he's hiding out there in Florida. And the guy, one of the guys he was with at Newtown Park Comprehensive is in Canada. And I'm investigating him. So I do believe this is an international ethical issue that is so much bigger than doping and game fixing. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment in here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Aderonke Bello. I'm from Nigeria, and I'm very passionate about this topic, sexual abuse. Karen, thank you so much for sharing your story. 3 years ago, I did a report on a player. I think I can say the story is the same as a dream destroyed and life shattered. The story was about a girl who wants to play football. She came from the northern part of Nigeria, which is very conservative, religious, Islam. And for her to actually come out to play football, it's huge. And unfortunately for her, she met this coach who abused her. She had to abort, and in the process, she lost her womb. So she lost her womb, and she had to go back to the same Kano state, north, to she's depressed. She's been going through a lot, and where I came from, we really don't have agencies, people to support people who actually go through or have gone through trauma. And I would love to talk to Karen. How can I support someone like this? After this report, I have been trying to talk to her. Now she's back to Kano State. She sells fabrics in the market, but she's still not the happy girl. She's not back to her usual self. And to say the fact, a lot of people are being abused in Nigeria, where I came from, even in Africa, and it is silent and quiet. No one is saying anything. The African Union, the different federations, sports federations, and all of that. It's something that is not, that has not been discussed. And like Laura said, it's huge. It's bigger than anti-doping and all that. How do you want to put a player or an athlete on the field, an athlete that is mentally unstable, that is depressed, that is going through emotional issues, someone that is being abused by an administrator or the coach? The fear of actually citing that coach by the side, and so we really have a lot to do. I don't know, Karen, how did you get healed? Can you just tell the audience, and especially myself, how can we help these people back home where I come from? Can you please give me tips and insight? Thank you very much.
I suppose I swam from 10 and from 17 years of age. I told nobody until after Derry O'Rourke went to prison. I was 31 before I even started, before I uttered those words. I'm 48 this year now. I can only say this year I am 100% well and healthy, that I'm able to stand in and do this and stay well and continue to speak out, because I feel it's very important. People need to know the truth. They need to know the hurt, the damage, the pain and the devastation, not only to the person that has been abused, but to your family, to your friends. It's a whole picture. So I didn't utter the words until I was 31. It took me from there on many, many different turns at different stages. You go up, you go down, you go up, you go down again. I had to acknowledge it inside myself first. And when I acknowledged it inside myself, my whole world that I had tried, as I said, so hard to keep together, then collapsed. So it's different stages. I suppose what helped me the most, and I didn't have enough time to go more into that, and I normally do, is the people I met along the way and how they treated me. I met, the nurses, the doctors. I went back to college 6 years ago because I left school with no education. I spent my whole life thinking I was thick and stupid. How could I listen in school? I went back to college 6 years ago and I've studied, and I'm now an accredited psychotherapist and counsellor. I went back and got my degree. My teachers, my counsellors, my supervisors, the nurses, the doctors, my parents, my brother, my brothers, my family. People, if you want to help somebody, the first thing, kindness, listen, be gentle, and it takes step by step, and it's slowly, slowly, slowly. It'll take years. Even as I say, I'm sitting here and I'm well, I have every day, it's there. But I've learned to mind myself and take care of myself. I've learned to love Karen, because I didn't love Karen. I hated Karen, because I thought Karen was a bad person. And Karen deserved everything she got, because bad people deserve bad things. Sitting here, I love Karen. I'm not a bad person. I'm a good person. I have a good heart. I don't want anyone else to end up with a life like mine. So when you ask me, what can you do to help? Be kind, be gentle, listen. I think, listen and listen and listen and let that person keep talking. And that's it. Kindness is the most important thing. It comes at different stages of, you're healing all the way through. But if you meet somebody that will listen to you and listen with kindness, that is the biggest thing that helped me in my life.
Thank you. I think we all love Karen, but that's an understatement maybe. Maybe, Bettina, you hear, of course, what Karen talked about, but maybe you can add also something from the Voice project to the question of this lady.
Well, I think the most important thing has been said, to listen carefully and to believe people. That's the first important step. Of course, for us in the Voice project, when we are taking interviews, we are also kind of witnessing all the harm and the suffering the survivors have in their lives, and we try to support and help them. Of course, it's just a little bit we can help them, but we make suggestions for counseling, for example, where to find help and support. And I think what is very important, Sander Roege was saying that connecting the survivors to each other, that's something we experienced in the Voice project, is a very powerful resource. Just a few weeks ago, we had a workshop at my university in Cologne. Karen Leach was joining this workshop and other survivors, and they had such an excellent connecting to each other, as far as I can judge, and Karen told me afterwards. So I think it is very important that people who share the same experience of sexual abuse in sport, that they can connect with each other and exchange their experiences. It helps them.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Good evening.
I think it's working. Yeah, it's working.
Yes, now it's working. Representing the Italian Government Office for Sport, and just to testify that the seminar has been very, very relevant from our point of view. So many congratulations to the organizers, and thanks, of course, to the victor, not the victim, as you were saying. And just to include at least a positive element, I've been also, I'm 53, but well, I've been also a top athlete, and not competing in the Olympics, but very close. That I was brought up in that environment, and luckily I can say that nothing of that kind happened to me, and as far as I can understand, to those colleagues at that time, so with them we were competing, but on one side. So I remain convinced that we have a solid basis in the world of sports which can be considered and allied. And on the other side, this is a technical element, there is nothing really confidential, but unfortunately also in Italy in the last 3 years, the Olympic Committee and the government is investigating on these cases. And even if on the press nothing has really appeared so far, the problem is a serious one, and we will take very much profit from this workshop, and of course we are at disposal, and at the same time we will interact, and many thanks to the Council of Europe as well, that we know they are working very well on that. Thanks for this, and thanks of course especially for Karen and for all the others who are not here, but who are playing a similar role that you are playing. Just to conclude, I'm sure that your parents would be very proud of what you are doing.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Are there any questions still? Yeah.
Hi there. Sorry. I'm Kristen Morley from Canada, and I just first want to say to Karen, I just love the language that you're using and the words. It's wonderful to hear your strength and your courage to share these stories. And I know through my own journey as a Canadian, I'm a Canadian athlete who was violated over 10 years ago by the Canadian and international sports system through the policies of the IOC. And just recently, after the last 3 years, I was able to work with my Ontario government in being able to my first human rights case when bringing forward the issues of policy of empowerment, which was concluded in the court outcomes in July this year, of human rights violations coming through policies being published through the Olympic movement and the International Olympic Committee specifically. It involved the World Anti-Doping Agency, World Cycling, and various other bodies, including my own government. And it was an interesting journey for me because I wanted to kind of talk about, I know we're talking about young people and it's very important, but we're also talking about high performance athletes. I come from Canada, I feel very lucky to come from Canada, but there's many women around the world who don't have access to the court system to be able to bring their voices forward from many impoverished countries around the world. And so my human rights win in Toronto was really, really important because it really kind of spoke to the issues of the system itself. First of all, where policies are being derived from at the highest levels of the world sports system, but also the lack of mechanisms that are available to athletes at the high performance and Olympic levels of sport to be able to even come forward. Like I was listening, it was interesting for me personally because I was listening to all the people on the board tonight talking about these wonderful programs going on here in Europe, which I applaud all of you. It needs to happen. But the one thing that really stuck out to me tonight in the reality of my own journey is that it's wonderful to have all these processes in place, but for a lot of people, there isn't a consistent action and in terms of a process of law. So for a lot of high-performance athletes, and also at the Olympic levels, we all sign international contracts that take us to the Court of Arbitration in Switzerland, which isn't even an inappropriate body of sport to even recognize many of the cases. So the athletes are really on their back foot to be able to come forward after being violated in these spaces. So there's no starting point. And then I learned from my own journey the pushback that came from the International Olympic Committee to even wanting to discuss it and deal with it in a proper court of law, which did occur in Toronto. They came kicking and screaming, but it did happen. And it was important to have it recognized. And I want to share with my European colleagues here is that, and I'm leaving this question with you too, looking at these issues as they're falling into place and how important they are for athletes. We're having a really good focus on, particularly at this conference, on athlete rights, human rights, and a real centric focus on the athletes. And my concern is, hearing the presentations tonight, is real action in terms, where do the athletes go? I'm hearing talking about going to the police, going to these different groups, but there isn't a consolidated group where the athletes can feel protected, accepted. Me and many athletes I've come to know around the world personally, I had to go outside the sports system in Canada and go to where my provincial body, my government in Ontario, supported my law process against the IOC, recognizing these human rights violations that are occurring from the highest level of sport. So there's issues of where athletes can go in a court of law, but it's also the behavior and the power issues that are occurring at the, in terms of policy that's coming out of the IOC. So I'd be interested, I just would be interested if anybody on the panel could talk a little bit about that. Some of the discussion that's going on in Canada is looking like in terms of an international ombudsman and taking it outside of the court of arbitration, where we can talk about these other issues that are going on in sport. I'm not talking about athlete contracts and anti-doping, which the CAS is designed for, but giving more access to athletes to have the resources they need to deal with these specific issues.
Do you have ideas about this yourself? How you can?
I'm actually here on this specific purpose. Speaking on this on Tuesday, but I think from the many, I feel lucky to have come from Canada, because to be able to have ever in my own province, my government in Ontario, paid for all my legal support.
Okay.
I would have never been able to go to the Court of Arbitration in Switzerland, which would cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars to compete against the International Olympic Committee, where they were trying to get me to go into. So we brought them in and took away the power because my government supported me to do it. So it was a really interesting process to go through, and I want to tell you about this because the things that you presented tonight are amazing. But the issue is in the reality of it, is that there has to be some kind of systematic governing body or ombudsman that has to be able to be there on behalf of athletes and give them that
yes, I understand.
Legal support.
Yes, legal support, maybe funding too. Are there people on the panel who would like to comment on this? Yeah?
Just briefly, all the effort is to develop built-in systems that would address the issue inside the sports context, and all the effort is for introducing procedures of screening backgrounds of professionals and volunteers, to set up information to children athletes that participate, what should they be aware of about their rights and violations, what the channels which should be predefined in which they could address for any worrying things, what the procedure should be in the administration of sports clubs in order to evaluate any allegations, and how the referral should be to anything outside the sports context. So all the effort is to try to build in comprehensive systems inside the sports sector in order to address that. And for doing that, we think that we should involve all involved parties. That means the sports sector, the sports clubs, the coaches, the academics that are researching the particular subject, the families, everybody, so that the sports sector in each country, in each particular sport, would desire to have that kind of procedure internally built in.
I suppose, is that working?
Yeah.
I suppose for me, and while we say there's policies, there's procedures, there's lovely booklets, there's, wonderful conferences, there's all this wonderful stuff being done. For me, it's much more than that, because a lot of the time, all this procedures and policies, they're put in lovely folders, lovely covers, and they're put on shelves, and they collect dust. And while we were all sitting here and speaking, and we're saying all this, right now, somewhere, there's children all over the world being abused in sport. It's not just about sexual abuse, it's emotional abuse, it's mental, it's physical, it's much bigger. People can go from here, they go back to their sporting organisations and they can take action. For me, it's still, more needs to be done. Being a part of The Voice and meeting other survivors there in Cologne, for me, I believe that for myself and other survivors, we should be going around speaking to clubs, to parents, to children. It's about bringing awareness. I know what it's like to be abused as a child in sport. I know what my coach did to me. If you weren't abused in sport, you can read the books, you can write the policies, do all that, but you don't actually know what happens. Myself, I'm only one of many, many survivors that are speaking out. And we are not being allowed into organisations, sporting organisations. We're not being brought into safety procedures, policies, and we're not being included. For me, that's wrong. When you ask about support, I can support, I know, I understand. So for the athletes, and I'm very conscious that when we say the name athletes, they're children. 18 and under are children. Athletes paints a different picture. When they get older and they're adults, okay, that's fine, athletes. But 18 and under, we are talking about children, and we are responsible for children in all sports. They need to be brought awareness, empowerment. It's not up to children to tell us they're being abused. It's up to us as adults to, one, make sure it doesn't happen. And if it is happening, that we are aware, we see, we pick up, and we do something about it straight away. For me now, in this year, 2017, it is not acceptable for children to be abused. There's no excuses. End of story. When I hear all these excuses, I go, no, enough is enough. If in 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years' time, somebody else is sitting here sharing their story like I am, then we as adults have not done enough. It is much more than policies, procedures, nice leaflets, nice handbooks, apps, conferences. It's much more than that. It's communication, it's teaching, it's bringing awareness to every club, every sport across the world. That's what I believe.
Thank you, Karen. I don't have to, I will not add anymore. Thank you. Sorry, but I have to, last question, is it possible? Last question, yes. At the back, and that's really the last question.
Thank you very much. I was just thinking about something that Celia Breckenridge told me 1 year ago. She's a professor in England, and she said that the world of sports needs something like WADA, but not for doping, for sexual abuse. What's your opinion on that? Should there be something like that?
You ask, Karen?
It's for everybody who feels
I
the question, and maybe not only in the panelists, but maybe.
I think that human rights in general, and especially child abuse, because I think that's the worst act ever. From my point of view as a professor in sports law, I think we cannot trust WADA, we cannot trust the Court of Arbitration for sports when it comes to human rights issues. So maybe let's think about something else, but not within the sports structure, I presume. But I don't know if others want to comment on this.
I think you're right. Some of the things we are talking about, there are, excuse me for the word, but there are procedures, there is police, there are prosecutors, and you can go to them. And I think that we have to learn within the sport that you sometimes have to go out of the sport because it's not sport specific. We think it is, but it is not. Child abuse is not sport specific. There are a lot of things that you can say within the sport. You have to make other measures than in another case, but dominance, too close encounters, all these things are in our world. And we do have human rights organizations, we do have police, we do have justice. We have to go there.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I have to. Yeah.
Within NOC, you're working with confidence, and I know that victims were speaking with trustees and they listened to them. But did NOC listen to their own trustees?
I think we will learn from the commission that is reporting on this, and I'm not going to pre-elaborate on it.
We will see. We have to wait till 12 December.
I don't see any contradiction in several of the things that, for instance, you can have introducing things internally to sports and also in some aspects or occasion require to refer to some external services. You might need procedures, but you also need training and awareness raising. So there's no real contradiction. We need action in multiple levels at this stage, and I think we all agree to that.
Mm-hmm. We agree to that, I think. Okay, thank you all for being here. Listen to the panel. I thank the panel, everybody on the panel, and especially Karen. And I want a big applause for everyone.